The second player we're going to talk about tonight is Aura. He's a Peach player from Oregon, and a lot of his homies kept on telling me, pick Aura, every time I put out one of those tweets in the comments of some of the videos of the other resume reviews. So I thought in this last batch, I might as well give the people what they want and talk about Aura, scroll through his wins and losses, and find out exactly how well he's done this year. Is it just his homies hyping it up, or is he really as good as everyone says? So let's jump into his results and see what the truth actually is. Starting off with a very unimpressive way to start off a year, a 97th at Genesis, losing to Hamyojo and Pew Pew. Hamyojo, for a refresher, is a Sheik from Texas, so we're definitely going to be highlighting that loss, but losing to Pew Pew is no big deal, and not picking up any big wins could have been a demoralizing start for R, but he powered through, and we'll see as we go on that R has a pretty damn good resume. Moving on to Full Bloom, a 33rd there, taking wins over Rocky. Rocky finished the year at 51st at the end of the 2018 season. He did not make the top 50. If I remember correctly, he had a lot of good wins against top players. I believe the one that really carried him was an SFAT win, if I'm remembering correctly. Based on where his rank was, we'd maybe give him a blue highlight, like a really standout win. But because I'm uncertain about where Rocky has fallen to, and more likely leaning on the side that it probably wasn't too overwhelmingly great, he's not really representing that 51st spot anymore, we'll just hit him with a normal highlight of a good win. And before we jump on to giving a very similar highlight here, and probably his worst performance of the year, the Battle of BC3, we can't look over this loss to Home Waffles, which Home Waffles surprisingly picked up a few really good wins this year, as we've seen throughout this resume review series. Nothing near a top 100 player, but still good to see for Home Waffles and Brandon, but not good to see for R. Kind of definitely a thing to be negatively highlighting from his resume. And also a very weird, because does Rocky also plays Falco, if I remember correctly? Yeah, actually really interesting to see. Getting the big 3 sets of his event, of ours event, is losing the Home Waffles Falco, beating Rocky's Falco, and losing the Ginger's Falco. Really, really odd. As I alluded to before, we've got a very, very weird Battle of BC. Probably one of the weirdest results, like, cohesively that I've seen. A win over Hugs, who, again, is slumping a little bit this year, kind of in the same vein we're talking about with Rocky, who just barely made it on the summer rankings at 50. Still definitely a good win for someone who's trying to make it in the top 100 to have. And then losses to Star and Blunted Object 10. So I asked the chat before we started. Blunted Object 10 is from BC, is a Falco player, old school, and Star is a Marth player. R said from his personal experience playing against and losing that person. I don't know what region Star is from, but nonetheless, Star is going to be a hard name to find nonetheless. Taking 2 bad losses to players, not the greatest thing to see in the world, I think. So we move down to 4th at Emerald City 8th, where he bounces back 2 months later with an incredible tournament, beating Commaster, Bladewise, Ty, and MMW, all players who were on the top 100 last year. All incredible wins to pick up, definitely in varying degrees, and you could think to each their own of which of these wins is the best. Those 4 wins on their own build an incredible resume for R just at that event. Losing the prize sent the European Fox. He's going to be on the ballot. He's probably on the fringe as well. I don't know if I'd maybe give that like a same level as the Hamyojo, like a light red. Like this is a less than desirable but not bad loss that we want to keep in mind. But I think very, very strongly this is an incredible event, picking up really, really great wins, like very much bolstering his resume, continuing as this weird resume is. Down to the Mango with a 9th there, picking up a win over Army, which is really, really good. Honestly, I could hit some of these wins with like the blue highlight, like the standout wins. I think the Army one definitely gets that. Beating Younger and Chillindude as well. Younger is a Falco main and Chillindude is Chillindude. And losing the Swedish Delight and Moki. No bad losses there at all. Continuing on like this good string of events. We have Bridgetown Blitz 4 with a win over Mustache Massacre. I believe we saw his name a lot when we were looking at Chango's resume. Mustache Massacre is also a Peach 6th in Oregon, so winning that did was cool. Not highlight worthy, and then losing to SB and Vinodin. I do not know how to pronounce it. I know I've seen this name a lot. But what matters more besides the pronunciation is what characters they play. SB is a Canadian Fox, and Vino is a Jigglypuff from Washington. Both players who are like a little bit outside the resume, the ballot range. I think we're going to hit those both with a light red. Smash Camp, End of Summer, where picked up another win over Hugs. cementing him as someone who's going to win over Hugs, or someone we'd expect to win over Hugs in the future, and beating Curve as well, who is the last player we're going to talk to tonight, or if you're watching the VOD, will be the last player in the resume review series. 2 really good wins, and losing to SaveAsUntitled, a Arizona Falcon player that we talked about earlier in the series. On the cusp of the resume, I still don't have the best feel for where R is going to finish on the rankings, so just to make sure I remember that, we'll highlight that. And then Lego, who is a Marth from California. Again, another loss we don't want to see. Actually, I don't know if this ends up being an overall positive or negative event with him already having this win over Hug, so this really doesn't do too much there. And Curve's also a player, and we'll get a better idea after we run through Curve's resume to see how good of a win this is. I'd maybe say it's like slightly negative overall from this event with the win over, with the loss of the SaveAsUntitled and Lego. But still, like, not the worst thing in the world, especially with the weirdly inconsistent resume we already have so far. Like, the same thing that came up when we were talking about Noel, that once you're kind of labeled as inconsistent, a couple more bad losses don't really change the perception of you that much, or at least don't change my perception of you that much. It's definitely still not great to add more onto the pile, but once you have so many of these like losses to players that are perceived to be like slightly outside of ballot range or slightly below you, it kind of just, you get that perception of what kind of player they are. Let's continue on with main stage, where R picks up another fantastic win over Westballs. And again, I've been speaking on this throughout the entire series, that a Westballs win is more desirable than you would think. Definitely more desirable than a Hugs win. I guess that's really not the best point of comparison, because Westball's still probably going to be like a top 30 player. And then losing to Franz and not really, again, I think we're seeing like this. The story of this is that Aura has really high ceilings, but also can be perceived as having a low floor of losing to players either in the end of the bout or right outside the bout range, with Franz and Nut, both people who I think are going to make the top 100. So I don't think these are super bad losses, but again, just kind of more building out the picture of what the skill floor is for Aura's results and how low we can potentially see him be reaching. But also the wins over Westballs, Army, Hugs, Rocky, Commaster, Bladewise, Ty. The fact that there's so many across so many events shows us how high the ceiling is for Aura. Portland, our retro game expo, which we've been seeing for a lot of the players in this area, with a win over Kevbot, who, I think it was Homemade Waffles who said when we were looking over Umarth that Kevbot is kind of a similar range, or in the same kind of conversation and stuff like that. When we talk about Umarth, we should also be talking about Kevbot. And then losing to Commaster and the guy who I was just talking about, Umarth, who's going to like slightly sneak into the top 100. Commaster definitely going to be top 100. So yeah, that is all the results for Aura. So that brings us around to the question, will Aura be making the top 100 this year with his Peach? Yeah, they're essentially the same thing, because Zamu's bad losses are like bad for a player who would be making the top 50. And Aura's losses are bad for a player who could potentially be higher up in the top 100, at the end of the top 100, with wins like Westball's Army. With all these really big wins, he could have definitely been a whole lot higher if he showed more consistency against the players like right below him, like the Pricents. So as a big summary for Aura, I'd like to see him clean up this consistency a whole lot more, see a lot less of these losses, and again, we'll see a little bit more on exactly how his consistency is when we have the bigger set counts and the full local results for the top 100, so we can get a better feel for how negative some of these records are, because I believe someone said in the chat about the Vino that he's strongly up against Vino or something like that. So again, that's something we'll be able to see, and probably we'll have already discussed and placed him on the ballot by the time this video comes out, because this will be out around like the 30th, as I'm hopefully done my ballot by now. But yeah, so we're most likely going to be having this discussion again. But as a big old summary, R's a great player. R has shown to have really high peaks. I look forward to R hopefully cleaning up the consistency stuff moving in the future. Definitely think R is going to be on the top 100. If I had to guess, I'd probably say the like 70 to 85 range feels about right. R could potentially maybe sneak into the like 65 kind of range, but again, we're going to have to wait to see. And I think that about wraps up our discussion of Aura.